I am Kashima, Assistant Director of Alumni and Volunteer Experience here at the university, and I'm very excited to welcome you all to our Networking in the New Year series this month. As you may or may not know, we are hosting a whole series of events in person and virtual to encourage our alumni to network with each other, depending on their various industries throughout January and February. And I hope that you all have been attending our events. If not, I'll be sure to drop the link in the chat here to encourage you all to register. Today, we are hosting our final virtual event of the series, a panel conversation called Inside Independent Consulting, where alumni from various industries and backgrounds will share their own experiences and lessons learned as an independent consultant. Before we dive into today's discussion, I do want to highlight a few house rules here. If you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A box only and not the chat. And we'll be sure to address as many questions as possible throughout the presentation and mostly at the end. This conversation will be recorded and sent out to all of you all by Friday at the very latest, so please keep an eye out for that email. And then after the webinar, a brief survey will pop up, so please complete that. We would love to hear your feedback of today's conversation and what you want to hear more of in the future as well. All right, so now I'm going to pass this to our panel moderator, Pam Schilling.
Excellent. Well, it is wonderful to be among the fellow University of Chicago alumni. I'm very fortunate to be asked to do a couple of these panel moderations throughout the year, and it's just always a treat to be among colleagues that have had a like experience. And we've put together an amazing panel today for you. I think a couple of comments just to get us started. There were a lot of questions that you all submitted, and we've built our discussion around those. So thank you for that. There is a lot that could be said. When we were debriefing as a group, we thought, gosh, this could be a 4 or 5 hour workshop. So we're going to hit on the high points. We're going to move quickly, cover ground and in places with depth where we think it's necessary. And as Kashima said, please put your questions in the Q&A. And that is the best way for us to be able to prioritize what we talk to at the end. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a quick intro about themselves. I will wrap it up with a bit of my background and then lead us into the conversation. So Samantha, I'm going to have you go first, please. Could you share who you are and what you studied at UChicago and a bit about your consulting practice right now?
Sounds good. Happy to, Pam. So hi, everyone. My name's Sam Jones. I am a alumni class of 13 undergraduate. I double majored in English and sociology while there. I also have an associate's in culinary from Kendall College and a master's in hospitality management from Florida International University. So I am a classic case of I was working in my industry for a long time as a culinary educator. I chose to leave that and was like, what do I do? And I was originally going to take a little bit of time and instead started picking up some small-time projects. And in 2023, decided to put that all together under one umbrella company that I called Into the Kitchen. And so essentially I focus on workforce development and nutrition education in the culinary and hospitality industry. Right now, I do have a full-time position working with Common Threads as a learning development manager. But I've decided to kind of maintain my own business, keeping a lot of my clients on a project-to-project basis to really just keep that network going and kind of keep that job stability, which is something that I know we are all looking for right now. So thank you, Pam.
Great. Matt, can we hear from you next?
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I graduated from the college in 2002 with a degree in English literature. And I grew up in Rhode Island, and now I've been in Chicago over half a lifetime. So maybe like some of you out there, someone that came out here for school and ended up staying here. So the group that I work with and helped co-found in 2014 is a group called Do Tank. And we're a strategy, innovation, and change firm, right? Those are big terms, right? But they're all on a continuum of kind of like designing the future and hopefully implementing it. And the kind of the foundational core of like how we do things is human-centered design or design thinking. And I may bring that up later in terms of there's a kind of a thing, especially in that time that was in the zeitgeist of the era and was a big part of the story about how we gain clients and grew as a business. So we're a broader team now. Started very much as an independent, or there was two of us for many, many years before we've grown in the last few years.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And Jocelyn.
Hello, I'm Jocelyn Zivin. I graduated from the college back in the old days in 1987 with a history major, and then I went on and got a PhD in history and taught university history for a few years, and then have spent the bulk of my 35-year career in higher education, administration, and at higher ed consulting firms. I work with smaller education nonprofits on strategic marketing, on thought leadership, which is sharing knowledge, data, et cetera, to help persuade potential funders, partners, et cetera, of your heft and legitimacy as an organization. And then also on, broader funding case making for nonprofits. It's often these days trying to find alternative sources of funding. So that's what I do. My work really began as an independent, began in early 2023 when I left my last full-time job working at a university. It was not the kind of work that I wanted to do at this stage of career. And I also wanted to get back to some history research and writing. And so I decided to strike it out on my own. And it's working pretty well so far.
Awesome. And again, I'm Pam Schilling. I'm going to be navigating us through the conversation. I am a graduate of Chicago Booth, class of 2000. Like many MBAs, I took a traditional consulting path. So I found myself in a couple of big firms and large strategy firms. And a sabbatical led me to do career coaching at Chicago Booth. And after doing that a couple of years, I built my first consulting firm independently, just me, doing career coaching and workshops. And then about 5 years ago, I translated that into a scalable ed tech platform. So I'm now kind of a consultant because as a founder, you're still doing a lot of consultative type work. So each of you, as you can see, we've done a little bit of different ways and work getting us into independent consulting. And what I'm going to briefly ask each of our panelists to do is really talk about that moment of inspiration. Like when and what was it that you felt like this was the time to really think about doing something independently, and what was that motivation? Matt, I'm going to start with you, and then move to you, Samantha, and then you again, Jocelyn.
Yeah, for me, Pam, it was so I shared the course that I went to the University of Chicago, but I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago to get my MBA, and that was in 2013. And my career before that was wandering. I didn't have any particular subject matter expertise. I had done some theater, so I had a generalist degree about business and kind of a general background. But in terms of the moment, Pam, right from the jump, I had gone back to grad school actually as a kind of a pivot point to try to kind of recenter and figure out where I might want to go. And I specifically wanted to do consulting. Um, a very much a main reason was variety. I'm mentally restless, and the idea of like looking at the same label and the same building every day, I didn't like that. And I wanted to see behind the curtain of a lot of different places. So the appeal of consultancy was the kind of the variety and the depth and the ability to use that to explore a lot of different areas. And then I got started specifically with a business partner, Mark McLaughlin, who lives in Scotland and was getting a thing going here. And it was he and we connected on LinkedIn. It was a very traditional kind of networking thing, and we hit it off, and we kind of went forth and organically grew the business. So that's kind of how it gets started.
Awesome. Samantha.
Sure. I mean, I think many of us have had a lot of experience in education, and I was working as a culinary teacher for many years. I had been a chef previous to that. I had worked in food PR before that. So I've kind of always tangentially been in this industry in a variety of ways. And when I left my teaching position, which anyone who's been a teacher is an incredibly hard and challenging time, I was originally going to give myself time off and was like, yeah, I need a break. And instead, I ended up having some of my partners that I had worked with throughout the years come to me and be like, oh, well, if you have a little bit of time, we need someone to do this. We need someone to pick up this. Like, could you offer your expertise in this space? And so, particularly for me, the moment was I was at an event for another client who I'd known for a long time, just started chatting with somebody, and he was like, oh, you have your own company? Oh, can we have a meeting to talk about what we could potentially do together? And that has sort of snowballed a lot of my conversations with people and ultimately led me to do a career design workshop actually at UChicago. And then that everyone in that meeting that I had with them, they were like, you should just try this and see if this works out. And that is what led me on that direction for about 2 years. And still to this day, I'm really grateful because it has increased my network. It has increased the opportunities that I've been given. Similar to Matt, I kind of like that variety and having different things come my way. And it keeps me really involved in my industry, which is something that I also truly love.
Excellent. Jocelyn, same question to you.
Well, I'm envious of you two. It sounds like it was a really smooth path. Um, you know, I it sounds like, hey, people are like, do some work for me. It would be great. Knew when I left my last full-time role that I was highly unlikely at my age and at the level I'd been working to get another full-time job. And so to me, it was about what skill sets do I have that I'm well known for, that people in my network would refer me for, and which of those things can I do on my own or with maybe a couple of partners. And then, I think the most important part of marketing is always, who's going to pay me and where are they going to get the money? So what kind of work can I do that's within people's budgets that is aligned with what my network knows me for? And so, for example, I ran a market research practice at Huron Consulting Group. I love survey research. I think it's amazing. That's not something that someone is going to hire me as an independent consultant to do. And if they did, quite frankly, I would recommend against me. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of, how you sort of weigh and balance and think through making the choices of, where your niche might be in the market.
And this is the perfect segue, what I want to talk about next. And I think for everybody listening, there were 4 themes just even from that intro set of comments, talking about expertise, talking about your network. What are people going to pay you to do? Because as a consultant, you are being hired, you have contracts and fees. And also underlying it is, what are you motivated to do? And what really kind of gets you out of bed and the 2 feet on the ground, hopping and excited even on a cold, chilly day like today. So I want to have everybody talk a little bit about that expertise and forming the business, and how did you really zoom in on that? And Jocelyn, I think I'm going to have you start there because you're someone probably in our group with the most significant amount of experience, but it seems like that was something you had to figure out a little bit.
So, okay, sorry, I was tracking you, Pam. What's the question again? I'm
So
really sorry.
your expertise,
Oh,
like
what
how do you
expertise?
zoom in
Yeah,
on that to get
yeah,
your business
yeah,
really launched?
yeah. Okay, so I knew the challenges and foibles of consulting because I'd worked at big consulting firms. So I knew what it was going to be, what I was up against as an independent consultant. And I also knew like how to protect myself against some, traps and challenges that you might fall into as an independent consultant. So, I don't may come up in a later question, but just that ability to write a very specific scope of work that sets expectations about what you're going to do, what you're going to get paid for, especially with nonprofit clients that I work with, tend to be not as accustomed to working with consultants. Maybe they work in nonprofits where things are a little bit less defined, or there's a lot of ongoing kind of contemplation about things. So, I had to find a way to work with those kinds of clients, but give the work and the project enough rigor and structure that we would end up in the same place in terms of what ultimately came out of the engagement.
Awesome. Sam, how about you? You talked about it a little bit, in the previous question, but, how'd you really zoom in on that expertise and how did you find the customers, the clients that were going to value that?
Sure. I mean, I had no experience in this space. And when I started, a lot of people were like, what is consulting? And I was like, well, it's putting all these different projects under one little company because for me, I really didn't expect, or I guess maybe imposter syndrome is the best space here, but I didn't really think I had an expertise. I was like, I've done all these different pieces. And then as I narrowed that, I kept seeing, okay, well, I've started programs, I've built them from the ground up and have developed all of the curriculum and materials and content and partnerships to really make those more sustainable. And so as I started kind of thinking through, like, as a resume, right? Like, what are the actual pieces that I've done and that I enjoy doing? And then kind of to Jocelyn's point, I sort of started looking at how would that be something I could market to somebody or put together for an actual quote or scope of work. And that's really kind of what helped align me as I started looking into the different projects that I would take on. And frankly, too, sometimes it was projects that were completely unexpected and not something that I did think that I necessarily had the skill set for, because it was maybe not in my particular space or industry, but it was tangential to it. And so it was like, oh, can you do a training? Like, oh, well, I've taught teenagers for 8 to 10 years, you can handle basically anything after talking to that type of audience. And that really kind of started showing me and proving to me that I did have the skill set to do this. And then that's sort of how word of mouth came around. As I was always going to my own industry events, I would get connected through some high level partners that I had had in the past. And truly, just because I was willing to sit down and have conversations, as Jocelyn pointed out too, putting those project scopes together and presenting it. I too work mostly with education and nonprofits in that space. And every time they're like, oh my gosh, this was so great. Thank you for like showing us the path that we could possibly take. And then from there, you kind of decide what those hours look like and how that builds into my general schedule, especially now as a full-time employee somewhere else. So it's something that took me a while to figure out and trust myself, but I think we're almost there.
All right, Matt, what was your perspective on that, your expertise and getting this business off the ground?
Getting off the ground is very hard. So while it was maybe easy to make the decision, it was much harder to get traction. So doing it is fundamentally an entrepreneurial activity. So you start with what you got. And if you got deep expertise and that's your story, go with it. If you don't, like I did, you got to find something else. So what kind of helped at that point in time was I was working in human-centered design or design thinking, which in my opinion, it's a way to solve problems and it does what it says on the label. It's not rocket science, right? There were some big books at the time. Some of you may know Alex Osterwald, or I won't go too deep, but it was something that required the ability to facilitate and be aware of this knowledge and these new methods of applying things rather than like, I've studied or I have like 10 years experience. So I was trying to get in on that story. Since it was in the zeitgeist, you could see in people's profiles if they had design thinking, and that'd give you a lead, like maybe they'd want to talk to you, right? So I'd say segueing that into advice is you only got what you got. So figure out your own story, whether that's expertise or you're doing something that's just in the air at the moment that people want to talk about. And that, from an entrepreneurial perspective, is what you need to kind of use to to try to get some momentum.
Yeah, that's amazing. And listening to all of you, and I think again for our audience, consultants are kind of like doctors, doctors for businesses or whatever clients. And as you all know, there's lots of different kinds of doctors. And, an internist or a dermatologist or a pediatrician, they do certain things and there's a lot of them, but you're drawn to a doctor for certain reasons. So, find those ways in your pathway to figure that out, because and the next thing we're going to talk about is how'd you get clients and what was your process to think about those clients paying you, the revenue side, the reality of this business. So Matt, I'm gonna kind of continue with you. How'd you get your first 3 clients? How'd you charge for your services?
There's To this day, our business has changed immensely, and what I do today is very different from what I did at the time. So when I started, it was very much like workshops, like Samantha, you talk about workshops. So I'll teach you this tool or that kind of thing. So how do we get our clients? So there's two main areas that we kind of went in, healthcare and kind of CPG or big companies. Very different environments from my experience. The CPG ones, even to this day, referrals, by the way, and Jocelyn, you'd mentioned this before, like when we talk like that, that is gold, right? Your network, man, there's nothing that beats that. But it can't be your only avenue, and maybe you don't have a big network like I didn't at the time. So it came through on the CPG side through some referrals. On the healthcare side, which is a mission-driven industry where people want to share and they want to learn, I think it's been a little easier for me to get those cold off the street chats. Like, so LinkedIn has been my kind of channel for trying to get people to have a conversation. I think a very important thing for me that I'd share in is as you guys are out there getting these chats and stuff, take it from me, you've got to detach yourself from the outcome because it is rejection and silence and rejection and silence. But it's a numbers game, you know? So if you detach yourself from the outcome and you know you have something valuable to offer and your goal is to network and to meet and to share and not to close a deal on the first one, you'll have a lot more endurance. So it was a lot of hard work, Pam, a lot of like, hey, how's it going? Would you like to chat?
Yeah. Yeah. Jocelyn, what was kind of your journey, those first, whether it was the first year or the first three
Yeah.
clients?
Well, what worked for me was really a lot of LinkedIn based kind of marketing activity, which really meant for me letting people know that this is what I was doing now, right? Because they had known me in more structured university roles, et cetera. So just literally letting people know. And for me, marketing is always about sharing some value with people through what you're posting. So, I thought momentarily about like, do I need a logo or a website? And, I did like invest in getting a decent headshot. But for me, it was really like, okay, since I'm trying to sell my thinking and my ability to help people figure out what to do with their sort of marketing effort, et cetera. And I was serving a nonprofit, smaller organizations. I just post and write stuff that's of value to them, whether or not they work with me. And so that, I find I haven't done it lately. And I'll just say right now, I have 3 now recurrent annual projects, which is amazing. But I really found when I posted on LinkedIn, even a little bit provocatively about something that I knew about that I thought people, you know, could think about or use, inevitably a few people picked up the phone or shot me a note. So it was a lot about letting people know what I was doing and then reminding them that I was doing it in a substantive way.
Yeah, cool. Samantha, how about you?
I'm probably going to echo a lot of things that both of you said, but Jocelyn, one thing that really resonated with me was just truly saying, like, oh, I'm doing this now. And being able to share that with people. And then they oftentimes will, come in their heads. And then to follow Matt saying, sometimes they follow up on it and sometimes they don't. And for me, what that meant was having a landing pad for those conversations. So I have like a digital, easy connector that does basically what a business card would do. It's free. It just has that information on it. It sends them to my LinkedIn. It gives them my contact information. I started a really easy $20 Canva website that has, all my information on it and some project examples, and it can drive people there as well. I have that in my email. So sometimes it's just people being like, oh, I clicked on your email address in the back and saw this, wonderful thing that you're doing, like keeping that in mind. And every time I go to different events, sometimes they are industry specific, sometimes they're more tangential. I'll meet people who are doing different things in our community, which is where I primarily work. And we'll share that information and connect with them on LinkedIn and try to follow up. And as Matt said, you got to really separate yourself because sometimes you have really good conversations and you're like already planning what you could do with them and the outcomes you could create. And sometimes you have to be like, well, didn't hear from them. I guess that's going to be on a pause for a while. And that's okay. And for me, doing what I do, where I do this part-time now, it's really choosing the projects that make the most sense within my own timeframes and within my skill sets, as well as clients that can kind of continue to build that network or reinforce that network for me. So I'm lucky that I get to be a little bit more picky these days, but it does really come down to those two things. It's just saying you're here and then having a place for people to go to hopefully, bookmark for the future.
Awesome. Matt, talk a little more in addition to what Jocelyn and Samantha said about the revenue side of your business. Early days, how were you charging fees? How has that changed where you are now?
In our work, since the day one, tried to have a set fee, so not an hourly rate. I know that that's not feasible in a lot of different areas, right? So I'm just sharing for me. So I'd try to scope out projects and it would be X number of dollars. And then on the delivery side, it was on me to manage the scope and sometimes better than others. So that's how I've kind of charged that, Pam, usually with terms of 50% upfront and 50% on completion, just to be in the weeds. And again, that might not work for everybody, but that's how we've done that. What I've tried to do when kind of scoping and think about how we charge is have a couple of kind of off the shelf kind of versions of things. I'm very curious to hear what the other panelists say. It rarely ends up being the insert name and it's off the shelf. And you'd love it to be because then you have efficiencies and deliverable. It's repeatable. Like you want it to be repeatable in many cases, but it rarely is. But it's nice to have those in inventory, right? So you can share it with people and you can show them and like, here's a 1 day workshop plus a pre-event and a post-event debrief or whatever. So I'd suggest to people is even if you're not just filling in the details on contracts, have a few productized versions of what you do, at least as a frame of reference that you can build off of.
Awesome. Yeah, and just to maybe synthesize a little bit what you all are saying, those first couple of clients, it's a little bit of a testing process. It might go fine, it might be a little murky. Ideally, it becomes a reference, which everybody is talking about. The referrals in this business are amazing as an independent. And then the financial side, it can be tricky. You don't want to give things away for free. People don't necessarily value, but you're also trying to get your foot off the ground. So doing, some of the thinking can be valuable, and knowing what you're doing, how value driven it is to the organization. Jocelyn's doing some fundraising. If you're doing great work, the organization gets funds, right? There are things that you deliver. So thinking a lot about that at the origins, but also sometimes you just need to get going and do great work.
Hey, Pam, can I pop in on that one?
Yeah.
Actually, I know the adage is, don't do any work for free or whatever. There are a couple sort of project types that I like hadn't done before. And so I did a couple things for not for free, but for like a few $100
Yeah.
so that I'd have like a reference and a sample and so I don't know about the get paid for everything you do right away. I'd rethink that maybe.
Yeah, and I think that that's spot on. When you're thoughtful about it, you learn that the value of the credit, it's more like an investment rather than doing it for free. That's maybe
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
MBA side, right? I'm making a conscious investment to get that credential, get that experience. And I think sometimes the semantics are helpful too, because you have valued clients, right? That you've built that together with them. So thank you for that's a great, I think again, a really good highlight for everybody. So now that you guys kind of talked about setting this up, let's talk about what the work looks like. And I want to have everybody discuss maybe a recent client project or a favorite client project that gives a really good sense of the skill set that you're bringing to the table, the work, the challenge, what's exciting. And Jocelyn, can we begin with you and have you give us a little bit of what the day in the life is for you and the work that you do?
Sure. So I was just going to talk a little bit about a nonprofit education client in Hawaii that I worked with and actually worked with fairly early on. That is several years ago. And they were having a hard time reaching donors and other kinds of community partners. They were really relying on government grants. And we're starting to see already then that, that was not going to be a reliable way to, you can't just keep going back to the same funders, especially public funders, and just ask them over and over again. They needed to find new ways to reach new kinds of supporters and funders. So that's what we worked on together, was really repositioning this organization as one that had a lot of utility and a lot to contribute in those terms that those potential funders, that resonated with them. So that's what we worked on, wrote a marketing plan, wrote a sort of a messaging and positioning plan, all that competitive distinction stuff, et cetera. And then I actually worked with them on a couple of pieces of thought leadership of more substantive stuff. So one of them was actually like a business presentation that they could make when they went to speak with, non-government people, and how to talk about like why this company would want to invest in what may seem like a social service thing, but actually has a lot of value for their company and their employees.
And in that work, Jocelyn, what do you feel like was really a stretch for you? You're working on your own, you have a bigger client team, I'm sure. Like if there's one or two things that really challenged you in that work, what?
I think I discovered or rediscovered something that I already knew, which is that I'm not a copywriter. I'm not like someone who's going to like write blog posts for you and churn out 5 a day. And, quite frankly, a lot of that stuff is now done by AI. You give it a message platform, it can write your, email outreaches and stuff. But, and then also on a similar note, that I really didn't want to get involved in working with clients on big productions where you'd have to have designers and, independent web developers. And, that's just not what I like to do. And I didn't feel like I could get the most money from doing that.
Yeah. Sam, can you take us through your project day in a life?
Sure. So one of the ways that I got into this was actually acting as a SME for a national nonprofit company. So I worked with them for a few years on redeveloping a curriculum that frankly had stemmed from me going to them and being like, I don't like this one thing. Is there something in the future that can be done differently? And then I got put on that panel to try to make that different. And that has sort of compounded every year into me getting more and more work with them. I've now helped with a national conference. I've taught classes. I've written the curriculum for those classes. I've gotten to train, about 300 educators in rooms to become better educators, particularly in the culinary industry. And it's really been able to kind of move me onto a platform and make more connections. Working with the national one actually led me to working with the state side of it here in Chicago. So it's sort of, as Jocelyn had mentioned earlier, giving away something for free. When I was working as a SME on that panel, I was doing that for free. And that continued those relationships and developed them more deeply to turn into something that similarly is a year-long process for me. I typically have a winter and a summer project with them that I get paid for and get to do sort of on my own time. And it's worked out to be one of my best clients that I can say, for obviously a variety of reasons. And within thinking about like scope of cost, that was actually a challenge for me because that being my biggest client, I didn't have as many options for how to navigate that field of cost. But I'm actually going to mention something, Jocelyn, you had said maybe last week when we were talking, was really thinking about what is the salary that you want, how to break that down in terms of project or time frame, and think about the value that you're giving there. When I started thinking about my own time here, I was thinking, what is something I have to do, in person or on demand? And I scaled that up in my value versus having something that I could do any time of day, or, what the skill sets might be that required those different things. And that's also helped me navigate some of these bigger clients that I've had and sort of put myself in different roles with them.
Excellent. Matt, do you want to add your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there, Samantha, and I remember you talking about it on that call, Jocelyn, too, about kind of knowing your own kind of needs and your own personal goals is so critical. And like I mentioned in the beginning, like I'm with a firm now from the very beginning. The goal was to create something where the value was multiplied in the brand. It wasn't a lifestyle business. It wasn't that, and there's no right or wrong, but knowing that up front. So we took very little money out and just kept plowing it back into the business because that was part of a pre-established vision. So I think for yourselves, what Samantha mentioned and Jocelyn mentioned is like, do have that vision, what you want out of it, what your own kind of design criteria are, and I think is really important. In terms of delivery, um, I can't separate delivery from business development. You probably people in the audience have sensed this from all of us is one of the big challenges. And so I'd say some of the work that's really great is some work can be almost paid business development. So if you do work with like an association or like a public facing organization, you get money, but the people in attendance are potential clients. Like that's awesome, right? So paid business development gigs are awesome. But the thing I'd say is regardless of how you're deploying your subject matter expertise, try to design into your engagements virality and exposure. What I mean by that is design into the way the work is done, the opportunity to get in front of other people and to showcase your work and your wares. You have to do your work in service of the client, absolutely. So I don't mean do this from a self-serving perspective, but where like testing and validating prototypes or getting feedback on things is of value to the work you're doing, and that allows you to bring other people into the room that can have side benefit to your own kind of network.
Matt, how many people do you have on your team now?
We're at 20 people now. Yeah.
Okay.
So we were at 3 people for the first like 2, 3, 4 for the first 6, 7 years of the company. And the last couple of years, long story short, we created a digital product, which required us to kind of become a different animal. We evolved, but we were very much the independent consultants for a very long time.
Super cool. So one thing I want to have each of you address a little bit, and then we're going to do some rapid fire questions before we go into the audience Q&A. If it isn't coming clear already, as an independent consultant and you're growing, you're doing so many different things and you're doing them simultaneously and you're kind of topic switching, which has a lot of, cognitive load attached to it. So how have you all found the ability to do that? And, Samantha, you have a full-time job and you're doing independent consulting part-time. So what do you think are some of the things that you've done to deal with that capacity, the, prevention of burnout, keeping your energy high and still doing the high quality work that's often expected of your client organizations? Maybe Samantha, have
Sure.
you talk first?
For me, I think kind of what Matt was saying, it's a lot of cross utilization, thinking about how can I take some of the skill sets or work on them or improve them, or how can I work with my own company to kind of make these different pieces work for multiple options. So for me, when I actually took my current job, I had a really big debate over whether to give up my own business because I had shockingly built it into something that was realistically going to make me the money that I was hoping to make after 2 years, which was kind of astounding to me that that worked out that way. But the reality was, I knew I still wanted to continue moving up into a national space where I am in my career and have that background. And so when I accepted the job, I actually spoke with them about, some of my clients that I wanted to keep and why they would bring value with me as part of this new company, whether that be learning new things by working for them instead of the company, or producing certain things that can be kind of unilaterally used, or skills that could be used. So a great example is working with like a learning management system. That was not something I came into the company with, but through a different client and experience. Now that's a skill set I can offer my current job and position. But as you mentioned, Pam, boundaries are really important, and really thinking about what are the actual scopes and timeframes of these things, and making sure that that communication is really clear, both with my own company and as well as like myself and my own family, right? Keeping those mindfulness of not expanding myself to too many different things, and thinking about what I enjoy, really, because I know Jocelyn, you had mentioned this, Matt, you kind of mentioned this. There are things that I don't love doing big events. It's not really my game. I like talking to people. I like developing work. I like working with students. And so I've sort of navigated that as well, to be like, learning to say no. There are projects that have come my way that I actually have thoroughly loved to be like, no, no thanks, sorry, not the time or not the thing. And that's incredibly empowering. And that's something that I've really learned from growth in the past few years to get to do.
Awesome. Jocelyn, I've learned already from you, I should find customers in Hawaii. So thank you
Yeah,
for sharing that. But in your work, I mean, you're doing a lot of different things with
yeah.
many organizations. What is it that you do to try to keep all this in balance?
Okay, look, I mean, I'm in a different stage of life. I'm an empty nester, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have to earn all the money I need to, keep my life going. So I just think I'm in a different stage of life, and so probably not as much of a balancing act. And then in terms of having several different clients at once, I mean, that was something I had a lot of experience with, having worked in consulting firms. And, to me, it's all about like, you need to have sort of a master calendar and really orient it around like milestones or deliverables on that calendar. Like the first draft of something is due to this client when, and then just making sure, because you own your calendar as you're organizing it, that you're kind of in different, I like to put it like you have things on different burners on the stove, right? There are different stages of cooking. And so anyway, that just comes, I guess, more naturally to me, having just done that for a lot of years.
Matt, your take on this?
Agree with everything that Samantha and Jocelyn said. It's not easy. You got to find your own kind of flow. You got to be organized. One thing I'd say is, and Rajesh has a comment here about balancing business development and business funnel, is there's different types of work, right? In terms of the mental energy. And so balancing that out, because you can't let the business development stuff, but you know what? I can listen to music and send out some LinkedIn stuff. I can't listen to music and look at a strategic plan for an R&D group. You know what I mean? So knowing that there's different types of work because you have to switch and you have such a large things you have to do, and kind of finding different points of the day where you can, do different things is helpful for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And thank you guys all for those comments. I mean, I find time prioritization is crucial when you're running a business. And, as your business evolves, and we all are in kind of different places in how we're approaching it. And I think for everyone, whatever work you're doing, independent consulting or not, finding ways to really focus on different aspects of work at different points in time and saying no to things can be extremely important, even when it comes to clients and potential revenue opportunities. So we've got some amazing questions in the Q&A, and Kashima is going to help us go through some of those and direct them at the panelists so that we can get some things that are very timely from the audience. So Kashima, what have you got for us to start?
Yes, so we have a question from Rich Cruz. He says, if I wanted to close a consulting engagement in the next 3 weeks, what would you recommend from a marketing and sales perspective? I guess anyone could jump in and answer that question.
Maybe you guys raise a hand if that's something you want to advise Rich on, or pass. I have a couple thoughts myself, but you all know kind of that cycle, right?
I don't know where Rich is starting from. I don't know if
Yeah.
he's like opening a door, like it's a new door full of a bunch of people he's never met before and he's trying to close something in 3 weeks. Or I don't know if he has warm leads and he's just having a hard time getting them to move. So I'm that's my
Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely some things that depend there. I think um, something that's always stuck with me, and I don't know the source for this, but someone shared that there's like the 4 Bs, maybe it's five. So someone needs to be a buyer, have budget, be a believer, and have a burning platform. So there's things that need to line up for someone to. And in terms of the time frame that's suggested, the 3 weeks, they've got to have the burning platform. So look at the people that have to make a decision, that there's time pressure on them, and those are probably the ones that are closest to close.
Yeah, and I might add to it, I think everyone has said this on the panel, your network is powerful. And the in-person events, whether it's in a startup community or professional associations, and having people that know your expertise. 3 weeks is pretty aggressive, but if sometimes you meet people, right time, right place, communicate, hit it off in the relationship, and it's possible. So good luck with that, Rich, if that's something you're trying to accomplish.
I'd like to
Ashima,
just
what
add
have you
one
got?
other thing as well.
Yeah, please.
Because I've been in positions where I've had really straightforward deadlines. And then not because it's my client or my partner who I'm working with who has an issue, the person they're working with might have an issue. And so, for example, I've had a client where I'm supposed to be going to the Bahamas for the last 2 years to do a training program, but because they keep pushing it off, we keep pushing it off. And so I think it's also keeping that open communication going with them and maybe settling on like monthly meetings or some time frame to make sure that you're still in that communication in that process, because while there's always going to be deadlines, there's also going to be other factors happening that you may not be informed about. So keeping your presence kind of available and making those moments to connect with them to be clear about what the expectation is something I would recommend too, just because there's a chance that it might change, especially in our independent consulting here, and we have to change with them in order to keep them as clients and in our network.
Thank you. So we do have a question about AI. So one person asked, how do you use AI in your practice, and how do you assess its potential as a tool versus competition with their project work?
Matt, could you maybe talk first about that and
Sure.
kick it off?
Yeah, happy to, Pam. I don't think we do anything super sophisticated. AI is helpful to quickly prepare for business meetings, so you can use it to kind of get the brief of who you're talking to, especially if you're talking to people in different areas. On the delivery side, we use AI extensively to pull insights from because you'll find Samantha, Jocelyn, you may have experienced this, and Pam, and sometimes clients will be like, instead of giving you just the information you need, we'll give you every slide deck we built for the last 6 years, right? So sometimes clients will, because it's easier for them to do that, to just forward a bunch of stuff. So AI is very helpful in seeing through the noise on the delivery side to find some of the key stuff. So we do use it on both sides.
Great. Jocelyn, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the weaknesses that I've had, and that I had to deal with is learning how to use Google Sheets, or, any spreadsheet platform. I just was never an Excel jockey, I didn't come up that way. And I just want to reassure people that I use Claude. Claude helps me figure out how to do things on Google Sheets. I can say to it, what if I want to like try to find the mean between, these five things? It is like a personal coach and guide to me in using spreadsheets. And I'd say that not just because spreadsheets are important. AI can really give you confidence in terms of knowing where to look or point to next. It doesn't tell you have a dumb question. If you say, I don't know how to use Google Sheets to do this, it isn't like, well, someone at your level of experience should have that. Like it's sort of naively genuine in giving you guidance and help on new skills, new research sources, all kinds of things. So I use it as kind of like a partner during the day.
Yeah, great point. Samantha?
I used it a lot when I was actually just beginning and thinking about my emails and my scopes and really the professional language in which to use. I was not familiar with kind of the business side and the consulting side. And so starting to kind of use it to look to what are the words I should be speaking to when I'm describing these different things? How should I organize it in a way that makes sense in this type of space? And that was incredibly helpful to me just to kind of get me started off the ground and sort of provide basic level templates that then I, have changed up over the years and bedazzled over the years to make them a little bit more mine and to the client that I'm speaking to. But that was incredibly helpful at the beginning. Just kind of like you, Jocelyn, something I didn't know. And it gave me the opportunity to just learn what other people were doing and how to set it up in a way that I was using the same language as everybody else.
Yeah, and to synthesize a little bit, as an independent, you need time. Time is your greatest and scarcest resource, and finding ways to use AI to make yourself more productive. But thinking back to something, Matt, you said as a business, you grew and created a product. So now we have the ability as independent consultants to think about AI products, which are repeatable and recurring revenue potentially. And then you all probably understand this, companies are struggling with how to use AI and to how to teach their staff the things Jocelyn was talking about. So, that's a place to really think about, again, your expertise and your motivation and where you're going to use these tools in the right way that's right for your practice, your business. Kashima,
Thank you
what's
all.
next?
Yeah, so we have a great question. Someone asked, do potential clients often come to panelists with a defined issue that they are trying to solve, or B, defined tasks that they need to be executed, or C, do panelists find that they proactively approach clients with solutions to their issues, including those that haven't been clearly defined?
Mhm. Jocelyn, could you take a
Sure. I mean, I think the first job that you do as a consultant with a potential client is start being a consultant. And I mean that by saying clients often don't really quite know how to explain what they want or what they need to do, other than the board is asking me to do this, like that kind of thing. And if they knew how to do it and they knew exactly what they wanted, they wouldn't need to hire you, or at least the kind of consulting that I do. So I find it like just inevitably part of the conversation to have certainly one, if not two, substantive conversations where I can offer guidance, like, here's one way we could go about it. They could say, we tried that in the past and didn't work with the board. Like, you have to frame the problem and the solution together with them. That's like step one, I think, of any consulting conversation or relationship.
Samantha, what about you?
I think what Jocelyn said is great advice. Yeah, trust me, anyone here on this call would be thrilled for someone to say, "This is exactly my problem. Can you help me solve it?" It does not. I wish I could say that's what happened, but usually you have to kind of find it. Everything Jocelyn said, and you got to kind of pull it out, frame it. Also, I'll speak for myself. Like, we're getting a little bigger now. We know brand recognition. People aren't finding us and saying, "Hey, we've heard about you." You've got to go out there and find the problems to solve. I wish I could say that they all come to your door, but that's a rare, lovely thing when it does.
And sometimes when it does, it's not actually the right thing,
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
I was gonna say
Yeah.
this is exactly what I was thinking, and I just saw someone's question in the chat too, of like how to utilize their experience to find their expertise in the space, and it's like sometimes it is just being like, okay, what do I see might be the problem? It's practicing active listening after you're having conversations and being like, I hear these three things are issues you may be having. And then when you create a scope of project or different ideas, you present those as ways in which you could support or create or solve the problems in which they might be having, and then you follow up and say, what could the phases of that look like, or what are their priorities? And that's really how you kind of break it down into what your work will look like with that client, in my opinion.
Great.
Another question we have is about a discussion around agreements when you're first meeting with a new client. If you all can share some tips on what that discussion includes as far as how you will handle potential conflicts, open communication, etc.
I'll
Matt,
take a first.
contracts.
I'll take a first crack, and I'd like to add maybe tip for you, Samantha and Jocelyn, because I think you'd have better perspective on it. But there's been a few questions about pricing structure too. So that relates to how you kick off, how you get started, how you get going. The pricing structure, I definitely defer to you guys on that. But in terms of getting going, yeah, chartering is super important. If anyone's run a workshop, I make this comparison that if you tell the attendees in the beginning of the workshop that we're going to dump slime on your head, when it happens, they don't get upset. But if all of a sudden you dump slime on someone's head, they'll be like, "What the hell?" So agreeing to rules of engagement, how you're going to act up front, gives you the flexibility to hold each other accountable and sometimes have some tough conversations. If you just get going without contracting, not just in terms of the hours and the rates, but contracting on the ways of working, meeting cadence, key milestones, you have to do that stuff. It allows you to have tough conversations and make sure that you make your margin at the end and you don't get into scope hell, is what I'd say on that.
Jocelyn, comment from you?
Well, I'm going to say you have to make a psychological deal with your client that positions them as taking responsibility for when things go wacky or things go out of scope. So one thing that I encounter is like suddenly like there's 3 or 4 more people who are going to read the drafts, marketing plan because the board chair has decided he's fascinated and wants to get involved, and all of those things. And so then all of a sudden that's a lot more work, right? You're supposed to have 4 board conversations. And so, you go back and you say to your client, hey, um, how can you gather the feedback from all these people and sort of deliver it to me with your own feedback in kind of a more packaged way? And then the client is kind of responsible for sense making, right? And if you kind of say, well, because you're the most important person at your client or at your organization, you're partnering with me on this, then it doesn't become kind of like a dump across, into your inbox. That's, I think, I've learned this lesson the hard way many, many times. Um, I think it's empowering your client and holding them up as an equal partner who has responsibility for getting things done that you agreed to.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree with both of you on that. I have a contract that I created to make sure that it's very clear about what the different costs are, what my time looks like in that. And kind of my version of what you're saying, Jocelyn, is one thing I learned early on is because I'm working with a lot of nonprofits and I'm working here in Chicago, I have to drive a lot of places. And that takes up a lot of time. And so I made sure it was very clear upfront with all my clients that my time starts the minute I get in the car, that I'm driving somewhere, because that might take 1, 2, 3 hours, depending on traffic here. And as we've mentioned, our time is valuable. And so I wanted to always be clear, very similarly in those contracts, here's my expectations, to have those hard conversations if necessary, to put deadlines on things or moments of, if this does extend, if this does need this, here's what that next phase could look like. And that way, truly, it brings you around to making sure that you're protected as well as your client has those boundaries in front of them. And it's easily understood what the expectations are between the two of you.
Awesome. So we're coming to the wrap up of our time. And as I said, we could talk about this for hours and hours. So I'm going to have each of the panelists give one kind of wrap up piece of advice as wisdom to all of you, and then I'll make a couple of closing comments to synthesize again, and then Kashima will hand it back to you. So Jocelyn, what is your best big final takeaway you want to give this group?
There's 2. One is it's not going to happen as fast as you want. It's not going to be as seamless as you want. Give yourself the grace of knowing it's going to take longer than you wish it did to get started and to really get up to speed. And the second one is figure out, it's a big problem for me, getting my clients to actually write checks and send them to me turns out to be a real issue sometimes because they're not really built to offer that kind of service to consultants. So make sure you know how you're getting paid, when you're getting paid, who's paying you, and just track it down. Don't let it fall through the cracks.
Fantastic. Matt.
Relates to what I put a comment there because Ellen asked about nursing experience. And I have this, you have to build your story. You have to build your hook. It's your experience is part of the personal story that fuels what you do, but what problems do you solve? How do you frame your value proposition in terms of pain relief that might be experienced by the client, gain creation? You've got to have a clean, clear value proposition.
Great. Samantha.
I totally agree. I think it's really not underestimating yourself, identifying what expertise or skills that you have, and also things that you might want to do or be a part of. I think a lot of this kind of starts with being able to identify some of those problems and think reflectively about how you could be the solution or how you could provide that solution, and really making sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity, right, to say yes to certain things that might be of interest, but you don't have the full knowledge of, or saying yes to things that you know everything about and you're excited to dive in with a new partner or client, and utilizing those people to help you expand your own network and what you do.
Amazing. So I want to thank Jocelyn, Matt, Samantha, kudos. Each of them has LinkedIn profiles, and you all know how that works in our wonderful alumni community. And, just a kind of a synthesis of this from my vantage point, consulting is a people business. You bring expertise. Don't underestimate the value of the relationships. And my first clients were UChicago alumni. And I did not take advantage of it, but I certainly appreciated that opportunity. A consulting partner who was a great mentor to mine gave me a wonderful book called The Trusted Advisor. I have no commissions that come to me, but I think it's a great way to think about this. And if you know what you do well and you know the value of it, then you can think about building this business. And I appreciate, I'm reflecting so much, Jocelyn, on your comment about it's not going to happen overnight, because I think that's true. And you all, if this is a path you want to go down, you have to trust yourself and be a bit bold. There's nothing wrong with saying to someone, I've got this amazing offering that I think can be valuable to your business. But if you don't say that, people aren't going to invite you to their office to do work for them. So thank you for listening. And, ideally there's some takeaways. And again, thanks to the UChicago alumni team for bringing together a fantastic topic. This was, I think, one of the most engaged topics of the series among, the great things that this group offers. And I hope you guys have some things that you can act upon as you go forward after our talk on independent consulting. So back to you, Kashima.
Yes, thank you all so much. Round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. As a quick reminder to everyone that's still on the call with us, please be sure to complete that survey. We would love to hear your feedback. And thank you once again for joining us. I hope to see you all at future networking and New Year events. And if you have any questions or comments, definitely feel free to email us. A recording will be sent out by Friday, so please be sure to keep an eye out for that in your email. And once again, thank you all. Have a good afternoon. And as again, special thank you to our panelists.